Well, and that's the reason why we brought in the ODPs, because again, we could make the requirements very prescriptive, but the ODPs again allow that level of flexibility. Now, you brought up the term earlier about organization-defined parameter. Who the heck is the organization?
Who is this mysterious organization?
Well, it's really no mystery. We made a decision a long time ago that organization is going to be context dependent. Now, in the case of the 171 Rev 3, the organization, the federal government, could be defined as the organization that defines the parameter. In fact, since this is a federal set of requirements going over the fence to the private sector, you want the feds to really have the first right of refusal. If they have something, and again, you're dealing with a set of requirements, even within DoD. These are going under different contracts. Some are critical, some are not so critical. You might want to have a greater specificity in those ODPs and certain types of contracts. Or you may decide that, hey, I'm not going to specify any parameter. I'll just let the non-feds take charge of that. I don't really care. It's a no-op from my perspective. But how the individual ODPs get instantiated is purely up. It's a policy-related question that's in the hands of the federal agency that's executing that.
And that makes perfect sense to me, because if you have a initial baseline of security controls and you're on contract to build a weapon system for the DoD, they will specify what those values should be for the ones which they care about, because it's their system. They are the organization. Exactly. If they pass on specifying some of those requirements and leave it up to your discretion, then you are the organization. In that case, it changes. Now, within the context of the CUI program, the ultimate organization, in my view, would be NARA as the CUI executive agent. They would be the ones to say it first. These are the minimum parameters for protecting CUI that need to be defined. And from there, they certainly probably won't define all 117 some odd ODPs in Rev 3. They may define some of them, at which point individual agencies might say that there are other parameters that they care about. For example, you wouldn't hard code in Department of State requirements for export controlled information into the initial baseline of 800-171 Rev 3, because people who aren't Department of State contractors don't have those requirements. That's why the tailoring process that we went into detail with from 853 is first influenced by external requirements first. So the organization changes. However, for a lot of people, like we said, 171 is their first experience with this context of tailoring. And so I had a very unscientific LinkedIn poll, one of my favorite hobbies. And I said, who do you think the organization is? And many, many people voted the contractor gets to determine what these variables should be. So one of my comments to NIST will be, I think that a lot of the context around what tailoring is and how those are determined exists in 853, was not carried over into 800-171. And because you have a very low level of understanding in private industry about how 53 works in the federal context, you have to be doubly careful to make sure to explain how that is supposed to work within the context, which may cause the front end of 800-171 to be longer and more, explanatory than it is currently, because people are not familiar with tailoring or ODPs or anything like that, even though that's the way 853 has existed all along.